Well, thanks very much, Gene. I'm delighted to be here, and I would like to spend a few minutes sort of talking about the perspectives of comparative effectiveness research from my new organization. I've been at PCORI since the beginning of November, so I guess I'm in my 6th month. But as Gene said, by background, I'm an internist. I'm a primary care physician, and spent a lot of time doing research on how physicians and patients sort of work together to make decisions, and I think that one of the themes of what I'm going to try to tell you about today is that comparative effectiveness research is about decision making. It's about trying to think about the information that people use, particularly patients themselves, in collaborating and making decisions about management of medical conditions with their providers. So, as Gene mentioned, PCORI is a new organization. It's been in existence only for 2 years, and it's, I guess, kind of the new funder of comparative effectiveness research. And so I'm going to sort of review the history and sort of, what the purpose of our organization is, tell you about the funding programs, and then sort of just talk about research projects in general and how a project that any of you might be thinking about would fit in with funding opportunities that are available. And so, as was mentioned, PCORI was kind of was created in an obscure provision of the Affordable Care Act, and this is on the slide here. This just gives some direct text that comes out of the Act, and it states that the purpose of the Institute is to assist patients, clinicians, purchasers, and policymakers in making informed health decisions by advancing the quality and relevance of evidence concerning the manner in which diseases, disorders, and other health conditions can effectively and appropriately be prevented, diagnosed, treated, monitored, and managed. And that's not even the end of that one sentence. But I think the point to make here is that, and I don't think this pointer is working, but anyway, in the red text, points out that these decisions are made at various levels. That the decision making that impacts on healthcare comes not only from preferences of patients, but also the sort of predilection of providers to use particular interventions, as well as all of the ins and outs of coverage policy and how policies are set up to make various options more or less available to patients. Don't want to spend a whole bunch of time on this, just to point out that there is a fair amount of money available to support comparative effectiveness research. This shows PCORI's budget over the next 3 or 4 years, and it's going to gradually increase up to about $500 million available to fund projects per year. This year, in 2013, PCORI plans to fund somewhere in the neighborhood of 150 to 200 new projects. We have sort of 3 cycles. You can submit your applications for funding every 4 months. So I think all of you are going to want to go back to your desks tonight and start writing, because it's if you don't sort of think about the kind of projects that might be suitable that you might want to participate in, you're not going to be able to sort of get these resources to support the kind of work that you want to do. So PCORI does have an agenda for research. We currently have 5 research programs. They're listed on this slide. I apologize, this is kind of a dense slide and kind of hard to read. But sort of the colored bars on this slide show sort of each of our 5 programs. The first program is the program that I'm the director of, which is the program on the assessment of prevention, diagnosis, and treatment options. And this is really, I think, what Jean described as classical comparative effectiveness research, or studies that look at alternative clinical options. One way to think about this is direct comparisons or a head-to-head comparison between one option for managing a condition and a different option. This could be one class of drugs versus another class of drugs. This can be stuff like medicines versus surgery. As was mentioned, it can even be things such as protocols for treatment, one protocol versus another protocol. So there's kind of a lot of variation in here, but the way to think about it, try to understand how do the outcomes differ between one option and a different option. And so in order to do this, and this gets back to the name of our institute, we're the Patient-Centered Outcomes Research Institute. And so patient-centered outcomes are outcomes that are important to patients. So sort of think about it, what do people really value in looking at the results? What do they want to achieve in trying to improve a medical condition? And so we're very interested in our program of studies that really sort of dive into that and try to look into the preferences that individual patients have for the different outcomes. So if we can understand which outcomes are important to them, then we can do better research. PCORI also has other scientific programs. We have a program on improving healthcare systems, which really sort of has a focus on complex conditions, often chronic diseases, and issues having to do with access to care. We have a communication and dissemination research program, which really gets, again, to sort of the heart of the matter here, which is shared decision-making, a collaborative decision-making between providers and patients, and to try to understand how we're interested in supporting research that gives us better insight into how to promote and bring about strategies that improve that collaboration between providers and patients. We also have a disparities program, which essentially looks at populations that have worse outcomes and try to understand how those outcomes can be improved. So this is looking at patient subgroups. And then finally, we have an infrastructure program that really has to do with developing data infrastructures. And I think that that's another sort of recurring theme in the comparative effectiveness world, is how health systems can develop better data systems that can support conducting comparative effectiveness research. And so be on the lookout. Next week, PCORI is going to release a set of announcements for an opportunity for funding for data infrastructure. And these can take the form either of infrastructure kind of integrated within a healthcare system, but it also, as you'll see, one of the announcements is going to be about essentially registries that are around groups of patients with common clinical conditions. And so take a look at that. That might be something that your organization might want to look into the opportunities for. We have a set of funding announcements that are out there now. Just a few points about those. These tend to be, these are broad. These are not currently focused on any particular diseases. So we're interested in funding programs across the spectrum of medical conditions. We do have a special interest in rare diseases. This comes out of the legislation. So if there are organizations that focus on the treatment of rare diseases, there are opportunities here. But the thing that we keep coming back to is that that sort of a requirement is that these projects look at outcomes that are important to patients. And let me sort of get into sort of how you get there. Well, I'll do that in a minute. I had this slide in here, and so I'll get back to this issue of patient-centered outcomes. We want to do good science. Comparative effectiveness is really not valuable unless it's scientifically rigorous. And so in December of 2012, PCORI released a set of what are called methodology standards. These are standards for conducting research. This slide has one of the 46 standards that were released back in December. And it, as you can read off the slide, it states that that the project should identify, select, recruit, and retain study participants representative of the spectrum of the population of interest, and ensure that data are collected thoroughly and systematically from all study participants. So I think you get sort of the sense of this. It's kind of like good research practice to make sure that people who are enrolled or who are providing data to studies are representative of the population for that condition, and that basically you have a minimum amount of missing data, and so that there's a thorough data collection effort. So general good practice stuff. I don't know that it's hard to follow these standards, but these standards do give you sort of some kind of a roadmap to what these studies should look like and how they should be conducted. So now I wanted to get back to sort of patient engagement. So this kind of comes down to kind of the belief or the model that we have at PCORI for conducting comparative effectiveness research. And so there's sort of different parts of it. We are interested in relevant outcomes. We are interested in outcomes that are important to patients. And so how do you get there? So PCORI actually is interested in engagement of patients in the conduct of the research project. So let me be clear about what this means. That this is not just that, you're running a clinical trial and you enroll patients in the trial. This is that you actually have patients that participate in conducting the project itself. And why would we do this? Why, it sounds good, but the concept here is that if a project is really going to sort of go through a step of making sure that the design of the project is focused on collecting data about outcomes that are relevant to patients, then you need to talk to patients to find out what's important to them. And so you need to engage patients up front in your project so that you get that input. This is in the design stage of the project. And when you sort of work through the details about how you actually go about collecting these data, the patients can inform you how best to do that. And so, so we do expect, and this kind of goes into our funding decisions, the projects will have that engagement. That this includes patients, this can include clinical stakeholders, people who are important to the medical context of the problem that you're trying to perform research on. And that our applications are actually evaluated. We have scoring criteria on patient engagement, and we include patients and stakeholders on our review panels. So we try to practice engagement because we want the people that we fund, that we provide funding to, undertake comparative effectiveness research, also to have engagement. And so sort of this kind of culture of engagement is important in sort of, understanding, our perspective on where the field should go. And clearly, we are trying to promote standards for conducting comparative effectiveness research, and this is one of the important parts of it. So sort of let's just talk about it. I want to just give you some general principles and then give you an example, and then I'm going to go sit down so that you don't have to listen to me anymore. But so when we're interested in a program of research on the assessment of management options for diseases, we want the studies to address critical decisions that face patients, their caregivers, and clinicians. In other words, the foundation of comparative effectiveness research is decision-making by patients and their providers. And so the way to sort of think about the design of a study is, what is the decision that the data that are being collected are going to inform? Is there a need? I mean, if there's already really good information out there that informs shared decision making, and there's enough information for patients and providers to really consider the options that are important to them, we don't need any more comparative effectiveness research for that clinical problem. So we need to understand where there are information gaps, what the decisions are, what the information is lacking to best inform those decisions, and then to design research that sort of fills those information gaps. These need to be important decisions that are lacking evidence. The studies need to address comparative benefits and harms of the options, and again, I already said it, outcomes that are important to patients. And then generally the information needs to be able to be used. And this gets back to thinking about the populations. The research should provide data about a broad enough population that this information can be disseminated and used by patients in other environments and settings. Just wanted to show you one project that actually we're currently funding. Now, we're new, so we don't have any completed projects yet. So I can't come up here and say, hey, look at all the great findings we have. We're still sort of hoping. But this is a project that just started. It, I think, is a really good example of comparative effectiveness research in 2013. The clinical situation here is the choice of treatment options for children with localization-related epilepsy. Localization-related epilepsy is seizures. It's not absence, which is that other kind of category of pediatric epilepsy. It's the kids with seizures, and there are several different seizure control medications that are available. And this particular study is a prospective randomized trial of 3 options for essentially single drug treatment of seizures in children. The 3 drugs are oxcarbazepine, lamotrigine, and levetiracetam. And anybody here who's sort of does a lot of work with seizure, you recognize these are kind of the standard drugs that you hear about all the time. But the point here is that these drugs all have some side effects. And so while control of seizures is an important outcome for these drugs, there's also serious concerns about cognitive effects of these medications. And how this kind of, the effects of the medication could affect a child's ability to perform well in school and sort of function in life. And so this study will examine cognitive functioning, attention, and specific cognitive-related behaviors at both 3 and 6 months follow-up. And the model here is that if we can understand these kind of outcomes at 6 months after starting one or the other of these medications, we have a pretty good sense about the longer term effects of these medications on cognition. And so this is a so-called head-to-head trial. It's going to randomize kids to a choice of a medication, and it's going to follow these kids closely for these particular, undesirable outcomes of the medications. Just wanted to remind you, we also have a healthcare systems funding area, which I think is relevant to Dr. Peterson's school. And so that we are interested in studies that look at systems of care and access, and might be something you want to consider going for. So just to summarize, at PCORI, we think that comparative effectiveness research projects should first of all be comparative. They should consider patient-relevant outcomes. They should assess differences in treatment effectiveness across subgroups. So we're very interested in projects that are able to look at subgroups. That they should include the relevant patients and other stakeholders on the research team, getting back to this point about engagement in the research process. And that all studies will address the issue of disseminating and implementing the results. We'll fund a large number of new projects in 2013 to 15, and you already heard all this. So we have a website. Please take a look. Like I said, we've got a new set of funding announcements that are going to come out next week that might be relevant to some of you in the audience. And put yourself on our email mailing list so that we'll push this information out to you whenever we have something new that comes out. So thank you very much.